Welcome to the Adam Stevens Coaching Podcast, where we explore all things life and well-being. Each week, I create content and have conversations that will help you create the mindset and the habits for lasting health and happiness. We are live. Hey guys, Adam Stevens, life and well-being coach. This is episode 36 of the Adam Stevens Coaching Podcast, and I decided I would just do it live today. Today's episode is entitled Happiness Traps, and I'm going to talk about three sort of cultural myths we have about happiness and being in a good mood. As always, you can go to adamstevenscoaching.com. You can scroll down, sign up for my well-being newsletter, and you'll get a couple of free teachings. You'll get my self-care transformation guide, and you will get my simple meditation technique. So without further ado, the number one cultural myth we have about happiness that I'll talk about in this episode is that we can and should be happy all of the time. And the reason I think that this is a myth, and the reason I think it doesn't really serve us well when we talk about being in a good mood in our well-being, is because it's just not possible. In fact, there's probably an evolutionary benefit to sadness in a way, and that a lot of our complex and negative emotions actually have some evolutionary adaptations, and they are really signals. If you've been following me over the last three and a half years since I've been running videos and YouTube and doing all this stuff and coaching, I tell you all the time that emotions are signals. They're just signals. They're just telling us what's going on. They're sort of part of probably our frontal cortex and different signals from the subconscious and all that. I'm not a clinical psychologist, and I'm not a neuropathologist. I don't know all the deep entrenchments of the brain and why that works. But what we ultimately know is that it's a practice, right? Happiness is a practice. It's not something that just magically appears. We have to kind of work for it. Consistently through habits, through self-care, through mindset work. But the biggest thing is to know with this myth is that we can't, nor should we be happy all the time. There's a lot of reasons in our culture right now why a lot of people wouldn't be happy, or would struggle with a lot of anxiety or even depression. And if you look at our culture, not even in the midst of the pandemic, we tend to be in the West, and I'll speak for Americans, we tend to be a little bit obsessed with status and material wealth or security. And it just doesn't always serve us well. It's funny, there's in economic theories and political theories, there's this big emphasis on that if we could create increased leisure in our culture, if we have time and downtime and all these things, it would increase our well-being and all. But turns out it doesn't really. Now, does it? Right? Like we have our lives are pretty easy in comparison to even our great-grandparents or our grandparents, right? You got to realize that people went through the Depression. Some of the pioneers, like I'm in St. Louis, I'm in the gateway to the West, right? People lived tragic lives and did all kinds of extremely hard things to establish our culture and our country. And you think before that, like great grandparents who came over here and landed in New York City from other parts of Europe or whatever, many of which are, all sorts of things having to flee due to wars and stuff. So some of our ancestors went through incredibly hard things and tragic things. And here we are with smartphones. And we ordered some Tupperware containers on Amazon last night, maybe 3 or 4 yesterday afternoon, and I woke up this morning and the Amazon containers were on our porch, right? So it's just 24/7 loop of commerce in our culture. So there's a lot of reasons why, even though our lives are so much easier now, people have negative emotion. People are frightened. I'm going to go out and say that people have really unrealistic expectations. Some people lack grit. They're unable to consistently keep a happy mindset, but that's okay. I'm going to talk about myth 2 now, and that is that we should immediately try and get rid of negative emotions. So if you're experiencing anxiety or sadness or whatnot, or depression, that we should immediately try and get rid of these things. Now, in the coaching space, all of coaching, if you go through an accredited training program, so I spent a year in an accredited training program, it's cognitive work. And what I mean by cognitive work is our training is basically a form of conversation in which we help a client sort of download and give us a picture of the scenario and talk about the emotions and the feelings associated with that. And then we validate their feelings, and we sort of acknowledge and we make sure that we really understand them. A big part of coaching is making sure that that they feel understood. So we validate people's emotions and feelings, and then we help them sort of do surgery on the cognitive structures of, well, when I feel that, what was I thinking? Well, I felt really lonely, and well, what was going through my head? Well, he doesn't really love me. Or another one would be, I felt really lonely if you were single and you were a dude, and I'll never find a decent woman or whatever. So there's a thought and a cognitive structure attached to an emotion or a feeling, which I just call an energy. I've said this for years as I've been doing these streams. Everything's an energy. Loneliness is an energy. Anger is an energy. When it comes to anger, like, it's not that we don't have complex emotions. It's just the path of least resistance for dudes is anger, right? So that's why we have a tendency to exude that more. But there's always a cognitive structure that launches the emotion, right? So, and these emotions are really intense. So when we talk about happiness traps, if we immediately try and shift out of a negative emotion, what we really do is just kind of stuff it, you know? And it's not a great thing to do, right? So they taught us, like I learned in coach training, or I had this amazing coaching instructor, her name was Leslie, and what she would always say is never force a cognitive shift. And this is why even like, so people will give well-meaning advice, and I got so much insight into spending the last several years talking to people in confidentiality and learning coaching, because we as humans and just as friends, like we're terrible at communication. I mean, how many times does someone well-meaning try and cheer you up or be super positive, and what they don't understand is when you're in a negative emotional space, you don't need to immediately shift. What you need is for people to listen to you, right? When I'm in a high energy place, I need to take action. When I'm in a low energy place, I need to process. And before I shift, I need to process. And then maybe after, connecting and after releasing some of that energy, as I escalate my energy a little bit, then I can make a better choice, right? It's like the classic example was, you don't choose to quit your job when you're really angry one day after a tough conference call or something. That's not a great thing. It doesn't really help you in the long run, because then you might be really angry that you're unemployed, right? So it's understanding that we have to process and really try and elevate our consciousness before we make decisions. So that's my second happiness trap, that we should immediately jump to the cognitive work. We should immediately be positive or adjust our attitudes. Or my favorite one is, oh, just be grateful. We should jump into gratitude, right? And if you go back probably way long time ago, I did an episode just on gratitude. And gratitude is really important. Having a gratitude journal is really important. But remember, when we're having an emotional energy or a negative emotion, it's okay to process for a bit. We don't have to jump straight to action or straight to a cognitive shift. And if you want to really be great at relationships, give people the dignity of their emotional experience. Let them exude. Now, if you can't handle a bunch of toxic emotion, that's fine. You need to sort of take it in limited doses. But if it comes to a good friend, or especially a child, especially your spouse, make a place for them to process emotionally. And what you're going to find is they'll feel a lot safer with you, and they'll escalate a little bit, and then the relationship becomes more vulnerable and beautiful because they feel safe emoting to you. And there's a nice little positive feedback loop there with connecting with people and building really more emotional and spiritual intimacy. So, and my last happiness myth is that we have to take responsibility. So the last myth is that we're victims. I bet you I've talked on victim mindset and victim consciousness. I don't know how many episodes I've talked about the victim mindset, but what we have to understand is we're ultimately responsible for our own needs, right? Um, Life is not a Coldplay song. Romance is not always perfect, right? We have to be able to take care of our own needs. As much as we want to work in amazing companies, have great culture, or be in amazing relationships, or have really amazing communities, what we have to realize is that happiness and our own needs are up to us, right? Now, back to the myth number 2 about immediately jumping into cognitive shifts. Some people, and I'll throw myself in this bucket a few years ago. I mean, I've been pretty open on my channel that I didn't work for 5 months in 2000, at the end of 2019. I hit a major roadblock in my career. My whole nervous system was fried, and I just had to reboot for a bit. And it happened to be amazing because things are so much better now. Things are better now than I ever could have imagined. And I was literally in a period of intense burnout where I was just going to walk away from my resume and my field altogether. And now, man, my life's so amazing. But at the time, I had a victim mindset. You know, what the victim mindset is, a very narrow-minded. It's very low in consciousness, whereas positivity and real visionary and creative energy is very much a high consciousness, right? Not to sound like too much of a hippie, even though I am. It's that very high vibe. It's that sort of high five, good vibes. It's like a real positive. We even call that a frequency. So if someone's really positive or really gentle and really peaceful, we'll say that's a high frequency person, right? The victim mindset is based in shame and guilt. It's the lowest frequency mindset. And if you're there on a regular basis, you cannot have a functional life. Now, some people are going through things that are horrible. I have a couple of friends that are going through divorces. I have different people have grief, right? You may have lost someone to COVID. You may have lost your job. There's all sorts of reasons that you could be going through profound periods of grief or negative emotion, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you if you have negative emotions. All of us do. The shift becomes, once we process, can we escalate our consciousness and take high quality actions that will lead us towards a brighter future? Because remember, coaching is about right now and building an action plan for the future. Whereas those other modalities, therapeutic work, different types of work, are about understanding and making peace with our past to build a base layer of self-awareness. At least that's how I would describe my own journey with it and how I understand it. No offense to actual trained psychotherapists. But I want to help a client. And really when I do this, we're constantly doing our own reflective work. That was part of our program, is to constantly be in a process of doing our own reflective work, which is why I currently work with 2 coaches myself. So if we're going to escalate our consciousness, we have to choose higher frequency thoughts. And that's when the cognitive shift comes in. So even if you're going through a really dark period right now, just realize you're not a victim. Now, you could have been victimized. I give that disclaimer every time I give a teaching on victim mindset. But most of the time, we're not stuck at work. We're not stuck in our toxic relationships. We are adults. We have autonomy, and we can move on if we need to. Or we can process and go through a period of grief if we need to. We can ask for what we need. We can ask for time off. So we're not victims, because what you have to understand is victims have no power. So if you're walking around with that mindset, you can never really build a functional life. And if you can't build a functional life, you can never really be happy, right? And you'll have so much negative emotion, and that's where you're going to see addiction. That's where you're going to see high levels of dysfunction. You'll see divorce. Often there's emotional neglect and everything that's associated with your little tribal family unit or your bigger family unit. When that stuff's going on, it can be very rooted in the past, and it's really painful. So there's no shame there. I still think people can benefit from coaching. I always say, I think I can have a good conversation. I could do one of my 90-minute deep sessions and help literally any person on the planet. Now, a lot of times they might need a whole lot more than me. It's like there's therapy, but like yoga, I would say yoga is almost like its own form of somatic and trauma work. And I know people say, what are you talking about? Yoga is amazing because it actually releases some of the energy from the fascia, from the tissue, as does massage or Reiki, or I don't know, is Reiki or Reiki, right? There's all sorts of different modalities. So when we're talking about happiness and we're talking about coming out of the victim mindset, what we need to realize, our needs are up to us. and we need to do some deep, good quality self-care work. So that's episode number 36, the happiness traps. I hope you enjoyed those. As always, if you're here still with me, check out the Adam Stevens Coaching Podcast, Apple, Spotify. I also put these up on YouTube. So thanks for tuning in. Go to adamstevenscoaching.com, scroll down, sign up for my wellness newsletter, and get the self-care transformation guide and the simple meditation technique. Thank you for tuning in. You rock. Have a great, happy day. Take it easy.